I'm Scott Lucas. This is today's EAWorldView on Iran. So the Supreme Leader called Israel a rabid dog. Now what? On Tuesday, the Supreme Leader, in a speech to 50,000 members of the besieged militia, after denouncing the United States and French governments for being duplicitous, devious, historically bad, turned his attention to Israel. He was blunt. The Zionist regime, he said, was the rabid dog of the region. Not only did he say it in a speech, but on Thursday, his office repeated the phrase and added it to a poster via Twitter. So, do we have a complete breakdown here, an international crisis, with the Supreme Leader's far from temperate language? No, not quite. Interestingly enough, the poster was sent out on Thursday as Iranians were meeting representatives from the 5+1 powers in the latest round of nuclear talks in Geneva. Discussions were centering, for example, on Iran's enrichment of 20% uranium, its proposed heavy water reactor at Iraq, and U.S.-led sanctions. Those talks have not neared an interim deal yet. They may not do so. However, what was significant was that they didn't break down because of Ayatollah Khamenei's rather florid language. They weren't suspended. Indeed, there wasn't even a pause in the discussions. While journalists scribbled down the latest words from Tehran, the fact is that the diplomats from the United States, Britain, France, China, Russia, and Iran were concerned about whether or not they could get a settlement. So what does it mean? For years, we've been treated to some rather ill-tempered language from Iran, say like Mahmoud Ahmadinejad's denial of the Holocaust, or the claim that there are no homosexuals in the entire country, or the comments of one Friday prayer leader that it was women's breast that caused a major earthquake. Sometimes this language can draw headlines, but the fact is that in this case, once you get the decision to turn to serious diplomacy, serious consideration of the issues, the rhetoric is on the surface. It doesn't necessarily cut to the core. And it's not just the rhetoric from Tehran I'm talking about here. Consider, for example, the rhetoric from Washington. President Obama restating that all military options are on the table. Almost no one in Geneva believes, in fact, that the United States is preparing to strike Tehran or even to support an Israeli strike. Indeed, speaking of Israel, one might consider the words last week of its Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, which is that if this deal was concluded, long-range missiles from Iran could strike the U.S. and Europe, a point backed up, as with the case of the Supreme Leader, through a poster on Twitter. No, as long as there is a decision to try to reach a resolution, this rhetoric should be treated as flutters, appealing to domestic audiences, trying to stir up the image of strength even while negotiations are going on, but not being disruptive. Do they ever become important? Yes. If the talks break down in Geneva, if there is no resumption of discussions, if, in other words, consideration of a deal is replaced with denunciations by each side, then the rhetoric comes back to center stage. Those people in the United States, Israel, elsewhere, who think Iran is the enemy bent on deploying nuclear weapons will point to the rabid dog statement, just as those in Iran who think the United States is the great Satan will point to Obama's continued reference to all options on the table. But for now, and if only for now, the Supreme Leader's rabid dog comment should be put in the diplomatic doghouse, locked away, and hopefully forgotten as we finally get a deal to limit Iran's nuclear program in exchange for an easing of sanctions. I'm Scott Lucas, and this has been EA's Worldview for today.